It's been almost a month since presidential elections in Azerbaijan, and there's been no letter, no congratulatory letter from US President Joe Biden to newly elect Ilham Aliyev. What does it tell you?
Uh, Well, it's hard to say. In my experience, letters to heads of state after elections are not kind of a normal pattern, if you will, from the U.S. side. I could be wrong on that. There may have been times when, a president, for whatever reason, has decided, a letter isn't appropriate or doesn't send letters of congratulations generally. So I don't have an explanation for it. I think you really would have to ask someone at the State Department or the National Security Council, because I have no insight as to what that means. After all,
But this is unusual. Is that unusual to you?
well, personally, I don't see it unusual. Um, Simply because as I read the letters that have, and I see them published in the Azerbaijan media, they are fairly standard, straightforward, nothing, nothing particularly significant about a letter in and of itself. I think more significant was the fact that in Munich, President Aliyev met with several senior U.S. government officials, as well as his other officials. So to me, that's the important thing.
Well, in Munich Security Conference, President Aliyev met with energy representative and uh, Secretary Blinken to discuss Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict. Is that what matters now in U.S.-Azerbaijan relations?
Well, it matters now. It's mattered, in the past, and it will matter in the future. It really is settling that conflict is the most important aspect of U.S. engagement with both Armenia and Azerbaijan. What can we do to help the process along? And I have no specific insights, but my guess is that was Secretary Blinken's major discussion item with President Aliyev. What President Aliyev and the Azerbaijan side decide to do now is very, very unclear. I get the feeling that they're sort of going from one forum to another, in terms of engaging with Armenia, saying on the one hand, we don't need outside mediation, but then here you've got this meeting, not just in Munich, but the follow-on meeting that the Germans had hosted, with Armenia and Azerbaijan specifically to advance the peace process.
Do
And
you
Russia is still trying to assert a role, and the U.S. interest is longstanding. So, the choice of one mechanism over another is still, I find that interesting.
Now, you mentioned Berlin meeting between the foreign ministers of Azerbaijan, Armenia, and Germany. Do
Yeah.
you consider this to be a return to the so-called Brussels peace process, or do you think it's just a one-time meeting?
Well, I really don't know. I know what from Azerbaijan's rhetoric. It's clear that they do not want to return to a Brussels format that involves France. Would they be interested in a format that would involve Germany as a major interlocutor, potentially mediator? I don't know. It seemed that this was a good meeting any meeting is good these days since they're so rare. But I really can't say that this is a substitute for a replacement of the Brussels format.
What are your expectations? Do you think they're gonna yield any result? Do you see political will there?
Well, when I was thinking about this at the end of last year, it seemed to me that uh, first of all there was going to be no progress before the Azerbaijan presidential elections, and secondly, I'm not sure there's going to be any major steps taken between now and the time that Azerbaijan is hosting the COP29 climate summit, which is really a very major activity and a major diplomatic event. So, officials are going to be very, very busy with that. So already now, if you wait until after COP29, which is early November, you're really looking at the end of next year with any sort of opening in terms of the attention of Baku on the peace process that isn't being diverted by either the uh, presidential elections that we just had or by the COP29. So I don't see honestly, I don't see anything happening in 2024, and I hope I'm wrong, but I just don't see the sort of the correlation of forces necessary to move this ahead.
Ambassador, you mentioned COP29. Indeed, the Azerbaijani government considers this to be a great deal. In fact, in his annual, just before on the New Year Eve address to the nation, Ilham Aliyev talked about COP29, calling it the major event of the year, 2024. Now, what do you think is the relation between this, let's call it, climate event and peace process? What do you think is the correlation? How can one affect the other one? Do you foresee, for instance, any boycott if things go wrong, or support for peace process if COP29 is a success?
Well, I think the most direct connection is that it's very unlikely that we're going to see a return to a military conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan before COP29. I just think that would be a horrible connection to have, and I think people will be trying to turn COP29 into a success, at least in terms of Azerbaijan's engagement. I think it would be interesting to see whether COP29 and the kinds of issues that are discussed there, things like the transformation of the global economic system from fossil fuels to renewable fuels, whether that might have an impact on relations, say, between Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Armenia. Can they work together on renewable energy projects that would have a regional basis? I think that would be a positive connection, if you will, that you could build between relations among Azerbaijan and its neighbors and COP29. And then for me, which I think would be the most interesting connection, is with the Caspian Sea and the reports that I've seen of the lowering of the levels of the Caspian Sea, again, as a climate issue that affects all of the countries who are neighbors, share a common interest in the Caspian, including Russia and Iran. So, yes, there are things that can happen. I don't think there'll be a bad connection in terms of resumption of war. But there's a potential if again if the countries are prepared to use this opportunity to do so to address some regional climate problems which are serious and can be the basis for good neighborly relations in the region.
Ambassador, there's a lot of talk about the possible escalation risk. Indeed, we did see the um, ceasefire been broken on February
Yeah.
13, nearly after 6 months of peace and quiet. Armenia is still discussing what exactly happened there and what was the Russian forces' role uh, in starting these clashes. Now, how do you evaluate this escalation possibility threat?
Well, it's always there. Uh, even in my best case scenario, where, uh, as I said, COP29 becomes the most important thing, and no one, Armenia, Azerbaijan, uh, no one wants a distraction of military action and a return to war. But even in the best case, there's always going to be an opportunity for one side or another to, exchange fire across a boundary line. We just had what seems to be good news, where Armenia has apparently released the Azerbaijani soldier who the Azerbaijani side says got lost in the middle of a snowstorm and crossed into the Armenian border. Uh, that's a good sign. But I think it's important to worry because we don't have a sustained peace process of engagement between Azerbaijan and Armenia. And as long as there isn't regular exchanges, discussion of border issues, there's going to be a vacuum that could be filled by, an accident like the Azerbaijani soldier going across the border or whoever was responsible for the exchange of fire. So yes, I'm always worried about that.
Do you consider the West's, let's say, collective West's efforts in this area successful, or does it stand a chance? I mean, how do you evaluate those efforts versus Russia's role?
Well, I'm not an unbiased observer of Russia's role. I think their role, their objective is not to build peace between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and to do everything that is in the power of the leadership, including Vladimir Putin, to keep the West from having any kind of positive engagement in the South Caucasus. So Russia's role, to me, has never been a positive one since the invasion of Ukraine. We see by their behavior and the way that they've been prepared to disregard the sovereignty and territorial integrity of a neighbor, that is not an objective for them in the South Caucasus. And in that, I mean Georgia as well as Armenia and Azerbaijan. We, we collectively have not been successful, but what is the measure of success? And for me, the measure of success is outside support, US, EU support for Armenia and Azerbaijan to engage, as I said earlier, in a continuous pattern of negotiations to address all of the issues that have to be addressed to resolve the conflict between the countries. It means borders, means transportation links. That means dealing with normalization of neighborly relations. But that's not going to happen, by going off to Brussels or to Berlin or even to Washington, every 60 or 90 days at foreign minister level having a photo opportunity, but no progress to show in having this continued pattern of engagement across a whole range of very important issues that have to be resolved if there's going to be peace. That's how success would be measured.
Mr. Ambassador, on one side we have Russia, and where things hardly change ever is Putin, his longtime serving foreign ambassador, Lavrov. On the other side, we have countries whose representatives rotate in this peace process. It's been Charles Michel from European Commission. It's been, U.S. State Secretary Blinken.
Right.
It's been French President Emmanuel Macron. Now it's German Foreign Minister Anna Werbach. They do change. How do you think it affects the negotiation? Does each of them bring something different, or do you think it's the same? It doesn't matter whether it's Paris, Charles Michel, or Werbach. Your view?
I don't think there's that much of a difference. It may be different for Ilham Aliyev not to have the French involved because he's created this myth of French neo-colonial interests in the South Caucasus, which doesn't exist. So he's put the French position in something quite different from the EU and now the German one. But I think if you kind of look at the substance of what the EU, in whatever form it is, whether it's collectively or individual countries, the basic position and the American position is the same. That is, how do we provide the outside support that can help advance direct bilateral negotiations between Armenia and Azerbaijan that lead to a settlement of the conflict? On that, I think there's no difference. I mean, there may be style questions, but I don't see, in terms of the objective and the sense of the role of the EU, compared to the US, I really don't see any difference in that. I mean, obviously, the personalities of leaders. I mean, they would like to be seen as the one who brought the process together and led to the outcome that I said both sides share. But beyond that, sort of personality dimension, I think substantively there's no difference between the EU collectively, France and Germany individually, and the United States. Well, I mean, change things. I'm not sure that the fact that France, because of the influence, of the Franco-Armenian community, pays more attention to Armenia. I mean, that is, I think understandable. I don't know that providing military assistance to Armenia is the policy that I would recommend at this particular point. But by the same token, I don't think Azerbaijan needs to be, continuing to purchase vast amounts of military equipment and engage in rhetoric that suggests that armed conflict is something that could break out at any minute. That only intensifies the focus on military aid and what may or may not be appropriate. So you know, I would I'd feel better if the French were not being so overt in providing this kind of assistance, but I'm not sure that it suggests any significant difference, in terms of their ultimate interests in achieving a peaceful resolution of the conflict. Add to your point about Russia and Azerbaijan, there is the peacekeeping force that resulted from the November 2020 war that still is in Azerbaijan, and so I think that's another dimension of it. But as far as Armenia, I think there's not going to be a major change in Armenia's relationship with Russia that I can tell. I see occasionally people will talk about maybe Armenia, withdraws from the CSTO. I can't imagine that Armenia would somehow withdraw from the bilateral security treaty that it has with Russia. I think the Russian military presence in Armenia, which is long-standing, will remain because it's not in Putin's interest to change that. I also don't think whatever the agreement was in Moscow that led to the presence of the peacekeeping force in Azerbaijan, I don't think the Russians are going to withdraw that presence either. So I just see that Russian role, both for Armenia and for Azerbaijan, as continuing. Okay, thank you very much. Well, there's a lot going on. I feel so sad for the journalists and Gubadi Bagoglu and the others who are in jail. I don't understand what's going through the mind of Aliyev and others. Well, I'm deeply troubled. I've been concerned even before Professor Gubadi Bagoglu's arrest back in August. I've been concerned about steps that the government has taken to suppress freedom of expression, suppress human rights. It's only intensified. And what I find striking with the world's appropriate concern about the murder of Navalny in Russia, the political leadership in Baku must understand if something happens to one of these prisoners, that the reaction of the international community is going to be dramatic. And this is not something that they can blame on, foreign interests or connections to counterfeiting currency or whatever the trumped up charges were. They will bear full responsibility for that themselves, and they should not want that to happen. And I think particularly in the run up to COP29, this is a time where they should make a gesture, release the people who have been improperly detained, and that includes the people you mentioned, as well as the young journalists who are still being detained, and present an image to the world of a responsible, important country that is involved in a major international conference, and that it's going to present its best face to the world. But I think it's a very risky period to continue to detain these people, given the Navalny tragedy. Do the right thing, I guess, is what I would